Here's a basic, all-you-need-to-know primer on making Christmas sugar cookies. The kind you roll out, cut into shapes, and decorate with a thin icing that's really a glaze. It sets up hard. I love this tradition. I'm pretty sure I've done this every year that I've been alive. There's tons of great roll-out sugar cookie recipes. They nearly all work, but the one I'm using is from my wife's grandmother, Grandma Scherstrom. See, make every year. She's left us no alternative. I've only slightly tweaked her recipe. The big thing I did is cut it in half. Be careful. Lots of heirloom holiday baking recipes were written in the days when people were more likely to have huge families. I cut this in half and it still makes 4 dozen cookies. Pretty much any sugar cookie dough will start with a softened butter. If your butter is cold, you can soften it in the microwave. I've got a stick and a half, that's 6 ounces, 170 grams. Drop the power to low, then just nuke it for 10 or 15 seconds at a time. Reach in and rotate. Another 10 seconds or so, reach in and rotate. If you didn't stop and rotate, part of the butter might melt while the other side is still cold. There we are, soft but not melted. Into a big mixing bowl, gotta have soft butter to beat in sugar, a cup and a half of granulated sugar, 300 grams. A cheap electric hand mixer makes baking so much easier, and I think I prefer them to expensive stand mixers for most things because they give you more control. You can move around and get in the corner. I see a lot of people on the internet complaining that their sugar cookies come out too fluffy and cakey. You might be creaming too much air into the butter at this stage. I really just bring them together before beating in 2 eggs until smooth. Grandma Scherstrom actually beats the eggs into the butter before she puts in the sugar. I think that's another way to keep the batter from getting too fluffy for roll-out cookies. I put in a lot of vanilla, at least a tablespoon. Some people prefer to put it in the icing, but that darkens the color, makes the icing less white. If you don't put in vanilla or almond extract or something into the batter, you should probably put in a tablespoon of milk or water just to get enough moisture. I love enough salt in the cookies to be noticeably salty. It's a great contrast against the sugar icing. I'm doing half a teaspoon of Morton kosher, like 3 grams. I've got salted butter in there already. If it was unsalted butter, I'd put twice as much salt in. Baking powder, 2 teaspoons, 8 grams. People say you got to mix this and the salt into the flour first. You absolutely do not have to do that. Not for cookies. Makes no difference. The all-purpose flour you want to mix in a little at a time. I'm starting with a cup. Going to do about 3 cups total, maybe 360 grams. If you tried to mix it in all at once, it would just explode everywhere. 3 batches is good. In my opinion, the cookies are best when the batter is very dry. Lots of flour in there. That's still quite sticky. In this kind of cookie, a really sticky batter tends to make a very thin, crispy cookie. I want one that's a little taller and more crumbly. Plus, the edges come out cleaner with a drier dough. They spread more if the dough is soft. I also want a cookie that's a little undersweet so that it works in harmony with the glaze, which is solid sugar. All this adds up to put in a lot of flour. I'm just mixing in flour until it's hardly sticky at all. You don't want to go too far, though, because if the batter is super dry, it'll crack a lot as you try to roll it out. That feels perfect right there, just barely sticky. Now, the essential step, the batter has to be cold when you roll it. I'll chill it in the fridge for at least an hour, during which time I can sit by the tree and enjoy a cup from the sponsor of this video, Trade Coffee. Trade is a way to discover amazing new coffees from the best roasters. You go online and take a quiz where you tell them what you like and how much you go through. I've been going through a lot lately. And then these wonderful packages start showing up at your door. Ooh, an espresso this time. I don't have an espresso machine, but the internet says you can do this in a French press. Just grind it super fine, use twice your normal amount, and let it steep in a few drops of water for a minute. Then you pour in the rest. I like a tiny pinch of salt, too. You rate the coffee online, and Trade's algorithm gets better and better at sending you stuff that you'll just love. The first 100 of you can get 30% off your first bag when you sign up with my link in the description. Free shipping, too. Hit my link in the description. Thank you, Trade. Now, let's get ready to roll. Cookie cutters. I recommend simple shapes. Complex ones like this darn snowflake are much harder to punch out. They're more delicate, and their edges tend to get overcooked. You'll see. Simple shapes are better. I switched from metal to plastic a few years ago and never looked back. The metal ones always rust on me, probably in part because I only use them once a year. The rest of the time, they sit in a humid cabinet. Baking sheets. You'll want as many as you can fit in your oven at a time. You don't have to use parchment paper, but I highly recommend it. It makes sticking impossible and cleanup easier, and I recommend getting the kind that come pre-cut into single sheets like this. Super convenient compared to the one big roll that you have to cut with scissors. Rolling pin. A wine bottle works if you don't have one. I recommend having a spatula handy to scrape the unbaked cookies off your rolling surface if they stick, and to keep them from sticking, you'll need some kind of edible powder. I'm using powdered sugar. You could just use flour. I honestly don't think it makes a big difference either way, and I absolutely think this is one of those times to just work directly on the countertop. You need a lot of space, and if you have a stone counter, that's perfect. Stone helps keep the batter from warming up too fast. And I recommend working with the dough straight out of the fridge. It might feel too cold to roll, roll, too brittle, but just be patient. Roll it a little, turn it. Roll it a little, turn it. Have faith, it will start to spread. Just be gentle. Turning helps you get it to spread evenly in all directions, and it keeps the bottom from sticking to the counter. As you turn, you release it and you sweep fresh powder around the underside. It doesn't matter at all if the edges crack up because we're punching out little shapes. We're not using the whole sheet as is. I'm shooting for 2 or 3 millimeters thick. It doesn't have to be precise. I like to have some thinner cookies that are a little crispier and some thicker ones that are a little chewier. It's all good. The secret to punching them out, push straight down hard, then keep pushing as you twist a little bit. The twisting pulls the cookie away from the scrap and releases its bottom from the countertop. Whoops. There you go. If possible, the easier thing to do is to use the cutter to simply lift the cookie over to the pan. They won't spread very much when they bake, so you can position them pretty close. You do want to punch out with maximum geometric efficiency to minimize waste. You can gather up the trimmings and roll it out again, but the cookies from the second rolling will never be as tender as those from the first. I try to select shapes that'll fit nicely within the natural contours of the rolled dough. Lauren is going to do a few, and there, she didn't twist the cutter with that snowflake, so it stuck to the counter. The spatula works great, though, and you'll need it more and more as the dough warms up and therefore gets softer and stickier. Everything is easier if you work fast. But best laid plans go out the window once tiny hands get involved. That's fine. This is Christmas cookies. It's not a special forces operation. Like I said, you can put them pretty close on the pan. They'll only spread a millimeter or so. Okay, so here's all my trimmings. I can gather those up, but if I tried to roll out and punch some more cookies now, look what happens. The dough is too warm, too soft and sticky. Just throw it in the freezer for 5 or 10 minutes and then you can start again. These cookies really will be fine. Their texture will just be a little harder than the first ones. Okay, time to bake. A convection bake setting was made for a job like this. That fan will circulate the air and make sure that all the pans bake reasonably evenly. I'm doing 350 Fahrenheit, 180 C convection. If you don't have a fan, I'd do 375 Fahrenheit, and you'll need to rotate the pans halfway through so they cook evenly. Though look, even with the fan, after about 18 minutes, I can see the bottom tray is done prematurely. It's hotter down there, apparently. Out it comes, and that snowflake got overdone. Complex shapes have more edge relative to their total mass, which means the edges are likely to get too hot. Not a fan. I basically look for the very first signs of browning. When I see the edges just starting to turn, the cookies are done, out they come. That kind of crackly surface on them is from the powdered sugar, by the way. If you don't like it, roll with flour, but it's all going to get covered in icing after we let these cool all the way down. You got to let them cool. To do really fancy decorating, you'd probably want a royal icing made with egg whites. I'd just do the simplest thing, which is a giant mountain of powdered sugar and just enough milk to dissolve it into a glaze. Water would be fine. You'll be shocked at how little moisture it takes, just a glug of milk. And you can always add more sugar or more milk if it's too thick or too thin. If you want a super shiny look on the dried cookie, you can put in a big squeeze of corn syrup, but that also softens the texture a bit. I prefer the glaze crispy when dry. That's perfect right there. Half of that goes into a big bowl, and the other half I'll divide into little bowls so that I can make different colors. Be careful about putting in too much food coloring. That's actually enough added moisture to make this too loose. I needed to mix in more powdered sugar. Plus, the color will darken as the cookie dries. I totally put in too much blue. I'll make this one green. Still needs a little more sugar. Glazes are very sensitive to moisture. Don't expect any advanced decorating tips here. I will only say that it's easier if you could just dip the cookie into your base coat of icing. That gets you nice clean edges that way, and you can drizzle over another color and have a ton of fun with a toothpick. You can certainly just paint on the icing with a butter knife if you'd rather do that. And if you're going to use sprinkles, you can control their flow much better if you just tap the bottle. Tap, tap, tap. That's as fancy as I get. Because honestly, once the aforementioned tiny hands get involved, this descends into pure chaos, as nature intended.
Yum.
Oh, you can't eat it. You gotta decorate it first.
Can I just lick this off?
If you set these aside, the icing will harden by morning and the cookie will soften a little bit as it sucks in moisture from the air. This is far and away my favorite part of Christmas. If I can do this with my grandkids one day, I will consider my life a win. Even though the aftermath is always a staggering mess. But you can eat the remnants as you clean, and you know what goes great with cookies? Remember to get 30% off your first bag of coffee from Trade with my link in the description, and have a Merry Christmas if that's your thing. Ah!